All right, we are recording. Hey, Reba, how's it going?
Good.
So, thank you for agreeing to participate in this series. This is our Anti-Racist Capoeira Instruction speaker series. The purpose of this series is to archive and amplify the work of folks that are doing race-conscious capoeira education in the community, and also provide paths forward for people who are looking to incorporate anti-racism work into their capoeira education. Reba, I'm so excited you said that you would be willing to do this. Can you tell people who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So thank you, first of all, for having me. I greatly appreciate it. I'm humbled for the opportunity. I am Reba Bowens. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've been doing capoeira now for about 10, 11 years under Mestre Esquilo and Contra Mestre Zumbi. And I am an accountant, or I work in the arts. I'm an arts administrator by day. And then by night, I do kind of dance and capoeira. That's a little background about me.
Yeah, so you also are teaching a bunch of kids. So we've talked about in our pre-interview that you have a very specific Afrocentric focus on your education. So kids in American education, they encounter Eurocentricity literally everywhere. They are taught history that erases people of color. They're shown whiteness as the default. And like, even when we look at travel, like everybody's like, go to Europe. Europe is the place to go. So it's very, a very closed mindset when we look at the education that kids are receiving. And so for you, Capoeira is one of the few places that we really can like center Afrocentric, education. Can you give me an idea of, or can you walk me through some of the choices that you made, like the deliberate choices you made in your education pedagogy for your students?
Mhm. Yeah, so most of my work with Capoeira is taking it to communities. So I usually take it to Black and Brown communities. And the main thing that I usually try to focus on from day one is the history. So really getting into the fact of where Capoeira came from, meaning that it was created from enslaved people, enslaved Africans and Native peoples, making sure that that is kind of married together from the beginning so that there isn't a separation that we're just doing these movements that while they're fun, but that we're talking about things in a historical context and trying to make sure that kids understand that it does have a history behind it. And it isn't something where somebody just jumped up one day and said, hey, I want to do a flip and I don't want to kick anybody, but there's something that was created, from a place of oppression to preserve culture, to be a form of resistance. And so making sure that kids understand that as opposed to just saying, yeah, we do capoeira just for fun, but it's more than that. Fun is a part of it, but there's so much more in that. So I try to make sure when I'm speaking from the first day that we're talking about history, that it's incorporated from the beginning and that it's not forgotten and then told later, but that they're kind of married together as we're going along this journey of talking about capoeira. So I try to make sure those are together.
So this is education that's obviously going to be very scaffolded. So you're going to have a really different interpretation for little kids versus, older
Mm-hmm.
adults. So can you kind of walk me through the age groups that you teach and give me maybe like a little bit of snapshot through each age group on how this framework plays out in their classes?
For most kids, their introduction into slavery is very different. Um, some might not even fully understand the concept of slavery. They may be taught slavery where they're playing games. So some of those games kind of put stereotypes already into kids at an early age. So when I'm talking to different kids about their different age levels, like some of the children I teach are young as 3, and then some are as old as 24. So they're young adults by that point. When I'm talking to kids when they're younger, some of the words I'm not going to use to describe the savagery that happened with slavery. I'm going to say that, yes, people were killed, but I'm not going to maybe talk about it in such a brutal manner when they're so young, because I thought a lot about what is my responsibility of putting certain images in their head so early versus that might be something that their parents and things like that might be feel more comfortable about. So that's something where you have to develop a relationship before you start deciding to enter in certain imageries that might be scary or might not be welcomed in the home so immediately. With older children, they kind of have an idea about slavery from school, but even in that context, there's still a lot of pieces about it that they don't know, or the pieces that they're taught are kind of from that, yes, that Eurocentric idea where it doesn't really delve into the fact that slavery was brutal, that it was savagery. It's kind of looked at it as like this thing that happened, but
Yeah.
sometimes not really getting into the details about what actually happened, that, people were actually lynched and what does a lynching look like. And so for older children, you can kind of share some of those details in a little bit more graphic way. Whereas younger children, I kind of take a lighter approach in doing that, or at least understanding what the parents want out of it before I go that route and say something that might offend the parent or might not be where they exactly want their child to be. But in the community spaces, I really try to make sure that I'm using words that are clear that slavery was not something that was fun, that what we're doing was started out of a place, like I said, of resistance and a place of repression, and making sure that we're not just saying, hey, we do capoeira, we swing our legs around, that sort of thing, but make sure that kids kind of understand where this is coming from that has context.
I think a lot, especially because you do primarily teach Black and brown kids, about that there's almost like a responsibility to teach it in a way that doesn't re-traumatize youth from, if you're 3 years old and you're hearing that people like you were brutally murdered because they looked like you, that's very, very different than telling that to a 18-year-old who has the cognitive ability to process that. But I think that people take it to mean that, like, because you can't teach it in, this certain context, you can't introduce younger children like to the realities of it. We don't have to necessarily like pretend that it didn't happen. We just can be different and deliberate about our words. And I think that it's interesting that you say of like, they're not taught the details in school. I'm thinking about in the US that there have been very deliberate campaigns from publishing companies to remove the details of slavery and to specifically make it seem like just this thing that happened, like this thing that was bad that happened. And all right, we're going to move on and talk about, I don't know, the memorizing presidents or something. Like,
No, that's true. Sometimes you don't really think about how the processing of what happened and how that has effects later. And it's more of talked about as, well, this thing happened this many years ago. This is how the country was founded. But even some of those details about really talking about how the country was founded and how, the Civil War, for example, that's still, some people have a debate about, they don't feel that the Civil War is about slavery, and some people feel the opposite, that it was. It's just like growing up in the South and you see people having the Confederate flag, and you as a Black person or a person of color, you're told one thing about the flag, and you have, your white counterparts who are told, well, this is my heritage. And you're like, well, that's not what I heard. That doesn't make sense. That's not understanding. And then even in school, when we talk about the Confederate flag, I don't remember us talking about it in the sense about what that flag was. It was kind of like, well, this is their flag. And that was kind of it. But it wasn't talked about why they had that flag and why people still were using that flag today.
So it sounds like a big part of the education that you're doing is creating nuance and creating like context for the students, which transfers very well between like understanding the diaspora in America and just understanding it in Brazil. And it sounds like kids can use capoeira as a link to kind of bridge understanding of what happened to people that look like them in Brazil to understand their own experiences as Black and brown youth in America. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say that's accurate. That's kind of accurate of my thought process, and then trying to show the correlation between, especially when thinking about the African diaspora, and explaining to Black and brown kids that sometimes they don't know that there's other cultures out there that look similar to them. I can say for myself on my own personal experiences, when you first see people in other countries that look like people back home, it can kind of be like, wait a minute, this is not America. Like it kind of, you have a moment where you're seeing like, wait a minute. And it's the realization, especially when you're young. Like I traveled when I was younger. So like, especially when you're under 18, I say, and you're still in those formative years, it kind of trips you out a little bit if you haven't been exposed to that stuff before, or the thought of like this global thing. So for kids, seeing Black and brown people outside of America that looks like them is like, whoa, that's different.
I think that that's a really good bridge to talking about representation, because in some circles, there's a lot of debate on whether representation matters or not. But you're in a very unique place because a lot of the kids that you work with have never seen a Black woman in martial arts, like ever. That's completely new to them. And then when you're bringing people for your events, they're seeing people that have traveled across the globe to be there at this event that look like them. So can you tell me a little bit about what that means for your students?
Yeah, I think it's really important, especially for Black males, when they see other men of color that aren't American, and they're speaking another language. Because sometimes you see something in a movie where somebody speaks another language, but it's different when you see it in person and when you are hearing it, because as a young person, it's like, oh my gosh, is that like, what is that? Like, that's different. Like you're just so curious. Like there's something that sparks in your head. It's just like, what's going on? Your senses kind of go off. And so for me, it's very important for the kids that I teach in the communities, whenever we have Cap Worthy events, to bring them to them, to try to educate their parents, like, please bring your child to this so that they can see that what I'm teaching them isn't silly. That when you see them at home doing these movements, it has purpose. It does lead you somewhere, that somebody used this to come here, so that they just don't think, well, oh, they're at the after school center, just kicking around, they're playing, ha ha ha. But it's like, no, please come and see that it has value and it has purpose and it has history in it. And as a woman, it's very important for me, I know, to show up in spaces for young Black girls, because they can see somebody in another space that's different from maybe what they've seen before. While I'm an athlete, it's a different type of athleticism. Mm-hmm. It's a different type of sport. It's not the traditional sport where some people are exposed to, where they're mainly just seeing like some things like track, or they're seeing like basketball and football, and people kind of pigeonhole them into those places. But it's like, let's really talk about, there's opportunities here that people can be in, and this is one of them, and showing that Cap Florida does provide different things for that. And it's not also, it's me being confident in doing something where it's like, they don't have to feel weird if somebody's like, well, why are you doing those flips? You know what I mean? Or why are you liking this type of thing? I've experienced some of that. So that's why I feel that the representation matters, that they kind of see all of that. And then also for a Black girl to see someone leading a group of boys is like, okay, she's confident, she's leading a group of boys. And then also for boys to see that, like, I feel that there's a person who feels confident, that it's okay to listen to a woman. It doesn't mean that it's demeaning. It doesn't mean that she's putting them down, but it's also, representation on so many levels, that I can say when I first started doing the work in the communities, I didn't fully understand some pieces of it, because I was also young as I was doing it. And then as I've gotten older, reading more and educating myself more, I started to understand the power that has. And in the beginning, sometimes you do work in the community, sometimes you don't understand the power that you have. But as you start to do more, you're like, okay, this has power, this has impact. I have to really understand what I'm doing and what I'm not doing.
Mm-hmm. So that's we're talking so far about representation and exposure to, women in leadership, Black women in leadership. But I also want to talk about exposure to the arts in general, with a focus on Capoeira, but more broadly the arts. So you have talked about the ways that the arts can give kids the access to things that they just never would have had otherwise. And it's interesting, in our pre-interview, we talked about how like STEM is always viewed, right, as like this pathway to a good life, whatever that means. But arts can also function in that same way to like expose kids to things that they would have never had otherwise. We can talk crap about STEM all day. I have 2 engineering degrees, so I'm fully prepared to crap all over my people. Yeah, I mean, in this STEM supremacy mindset, I think that the arts get left out. So can you talk about what your personal arts and education did for you?
Mm-hmm. So I have the opportunity to go to a public art school for 6 years. So from 6th grade to 12th grade, I had that opportunity. And if I had not had that opportunity, I know I would not be doing dance. I may have gone into doing capoeira. I don't know, because I was doing karate before that. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. That's something that I will never know, because I didn't go that other route where I didn't go to the school. But the school did open my eyes to seeing things like an opera. I remember the first time seeing Alvin Ailey through that school, which is like my favorite dance company. I remember seeing musicals, like Broadway musicals, Broadway plays. I remember seeing, like the Celtic folks who do the clogging. I remember seeing them one time. But there were so many opportunities that school gave me, that it allowed me to understand that there was so much more than what I was used to seeing at the time. Mm-hmm. It allowed me also to understand that some of my peers that were in my school, I was fortunate enough that my parents could give me a lifestyle that I could afford to go to swimming lessons and things like that. But there were peers in my school growing up who I don't think that they had those opportunities so freely. And so I was very thankful for them, so that when I went to this art school and I saw that there were other people there with so diverse backgrounds, as I've gotten older, I realized that school really impacted a lot of us way more than we understood at the time being at that school.
Yeah.
It showed us that we had opportunities and we could do so many different things, that it wasn't just about us being book smart, that if you're creative, that if you can think outside the box, that if you can figure out how to work well with others in this creative team and do something, you can move forward so much more, so much further. So that school gave a lot of opportunities. I traveled for the first time to New York, being in that art school. And I was, I think, 17. And that was amazing. We got to see Rockettes. We got to go to see like Radio City Music Hall. That was really cool. I traveled to Paris, France when I was 11.
What?
11 or maybe like 14, I think.
Wait, that was with your school?
Yes, it was with my school.
Your school took you to France?
Yeah, that was pretty. Yeah, it was pretty cool. And but to even have that experience, like to go take a ballet class, in French was like wild to some of us. And the trip, the trip wasn't cheap. I'm not going to say that it wasn't cheap, but it also was way more affordable than if I hadn't gone to that school.
Yeah.
And even the thought, like I would have never thought to go to Paris, France when I was like 13. I started doing ballet for the first time at that school, like even to audition at that school at that time was just like, can you follow directions and do a split? And I remember the teacher just asked me, do you like dance, in the like little interview? And I was like, yeah, cool. And that was it. Now I wish the school doesn't operate that way. And I so wish it did, because we were, in a sense, these kids we were like the experiment. Like they had just opened the school, I think the year before, and they were trying to get kids from everywhere in the county. And we were the experiment. And it happened to work. I think it worked. But it was really an amazing opportunity to be allowed access to the arts and access to seeing things that I probably wouldn't have seen if I had went to a traditional high school. I would have thought like, oh, I knew the opera existed, for example, but actually to go to an opera and being like, wow, this is cool to hear this person singing this high-pitched language and watching this story, and then understanding how the opera works was like eye-opening, because most of the time when you hear it, you just hear somebody like singing like this, like really loud, big person, right, singing in this boisterous voice. And it's usually like a woman with like all her hair is all done up and some crazy like, wig. But when you go there and you start to understand it, you're like, oh, there's a story here. Oh, okay, she's in love with him. Like you start to get that it's a play. It's not just people just walk out and they just sing like really loud. So it's access to the arts, and that experience for me changed my life. It greatly changed my life.
So when you look in that context of exposure to the arts, where do you want Capoeira to function in that like paradigm for your students?
I want Capoeira to provide them like a sense of hope, and show them also from a history standpoint that brown people created something, black and brown people created something at a time when they were oppressed, but they used that over time, it's evolved into something that can provide you a sense of hope. And that's one thing I think that Capoeira has kind of remained in a theme, is the theme of hope. Hope to go somewhere, hope to do a movement, hope to sing a song, hope to meet new people. It provides that in so many ways that, to me, Capoeira for some people can be a ticket, can be a place of access. That's why I said I try to make sure that the kids, especially the Black boys, see men doing these other things and say, it's not weird if you want to do a flip and sing a song in another language. You are not weird. It's fine. Like, so that they feel comfortable in their skin. Same for Black girls. Is the idea to give you, so you feel comfortable in your skin and knowing that this was created from your ancestors. It wasn't created just like somebody woke up one day and said, I think I like that move. I'm going to put my hand in front of my face. And it has a purpose and context. So it's really to give them a sense of hope that there's something bigger out there, and that if they really practice hard, that's always what I tell them, if you practice really hard, you're going to be able to get good. So it's just giving hope.
I'm just thinking right now about, so often we kind of give Black, brown, poor, otherwise marginalized youth this idea of like, you can do anything. Here's this thing that you could do, but there's not necessarily like pathways for them to do it. And then a lot of kids can absorb that, and they can be like, well, I didn't grow up to be a doctor. but you know, I didn't have the schooling that got me there. I didn't have this, but they take it in there like, this is a problem with myself. That's something obviously we as Americans need to like push our institutions to do, is to create like actual bridges to get kids to the places we tell them that they can go, you know?
Right.
But I'm thinking just about Capoeira, when you speak of hope, right? There's hope, but there's also like a tangible path to get there for kids. There's a path to build their movements, to start with a movement that's small and build it to the place where like you can do like how you do with like your crazy flips and everything. I I always love it when you're in the Hoda, because I'm like, everybody, like, whenever we have the split Hodas, and like, I don't know if you know this, but like, people will come over because they'll be like, Reepa's in the Hoda, I want to see her, I want to see her.
No,
but I'm like,
okay.
sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I say that to say that there is like a path to build, but there's also paths to build in other ways. Like when we look at the structural barriers that might prevent a kid in a certain school district from growing up to get the ACT score, to get the admission, to get the institution, to get the scholarship that would get them where they want. When we look at Capoeira, there's a lot of subversion of those structural barriers, you know, like a kid that is not in a language academy that only they can get to, that they can't get to because of their zip code and the funding for their school, they can still learn a language, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It lets them know that there's like, if you can learn Portuguese, then maybe like, hey mom, maybe I can learn Spanish. Or then they may feel more confident when they go out and they hear people speaking Spanish and they're like, I kind of know what they're saying.
Yeah.
And like they may not fully understand, right? But they can have some context of like, oh, that sounds similar.
Mm-hmm.
Or even just giving them the confidence of like, I know 2 languages. Because I remember growing up like that, I didn't get, it didn't seem cool to me at the time to know 2 languages. But when you do something like Capoeira, you're like, man, I wish I know like 5. Like, you know, like you want to know things like that, like it motivates you. So I'm hoping through my work that with kids, it's like, let me give them something where they're like, you know what, I know this language, maybe I learned this one. Okay, now I learned this one. It's like some folks I know who learn Chinese because they like watching anime or Japanese, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of the same thing to me, that if we can give them hope that you can learn this one language, what about you learning this next one? Okay, well, don't feel afraid when the teacher tries to tell you you can't learn it. You can, because what do you do outside of school? You do Capoeira. You know movements. You know it. You can sing a song in another language and play an instrument. So now you're coordinated. If a teacher told you weren't coordinated, maybe you're just not coordinated yet because you haven't practiced. You know, like it's getting that mindset of like, it's not impossible. It's just saying maybe you didn't do it just yet, but it's still possible. There's still hope for you to do it. Yeah. So that's kind of like what you're saying, breaking those barriers, and it's breaking that barrier in your mind. And so I hope a lot of times when I'm working with kids is breaking that concept of like, you can do it. And these are some things that you already are doing.
I just want to bridge real quick, because I'm actually in a education PhD program, and like literally everything that you just said fits in with the concept of growth mindset. So like creating that bridge, creating that yet for students is like, and is part of what currently we haven't been disproven yet is like the go-to for how do you teach kids to like have them, like a lot of the times we teach kids like, you're not smart, or you are bad at math, you are not creative. But what you're talking about is growth mindset, which is where you say, you're not good at this yet. You haven't practiced it. So of course you're not good at it. You haven't practiced it yet. Let's see how you do when you practice, you know?
Right.
So
right. That is kind of, exactly what I really try to make sure kids get. Because I've seen kids get frustrated about not doing a kick, and it's like, hey, it's okay today. We just learned this today. Or maybe this isn't your kick today. Remember last time you did such and such, you know, and sometimes it's the reinforcement of that so that they also don't get discouraged. But then reminding them, you're already standing up here doing Capoeira. You're already doing something different. Don't worry about today. You did enough today. You did good. I get it. It's frustrating. We'll come back to you. Don't worry.
Yeah.
So that you're right. That is that mindset.
I love it. This is the fun part about like doing all of this like education research, is that then I start seeing it in my friends teaching, and I'm like, yes, keep going. You are practicing scientifically validated practices. Wouldn't matter if it's working for you anyway, but just, it's so cool to see, like, to be able to identify like what my friends are doing and like, oh, I learned about this. But I want to circle back to the idea of hope and the idea of what Capoeira does for students. And I want to talk about it in the context of like international travel. Like there are a lot of structural barriers to international travel and therefore international exposure, to having friends that are in different countries, to having a mindset that's bigger than the US. And I think we think a lot about how like capoeira kind of scoots around those barriers, because like let's say that you were not a capoeirista and you wanted to go to Brazil, right? So you have to figure out where you want to go, because Brazil is a big place and you don't know that much about it. You have to find a hotel. You have to translate all the materials to figure out how you're going to get around that area when you might not necessarily totally speak Portuguese. You have to get your ticket. You got to get transportation. You got to find activities. You got to meet friends. You're back. No, it's all good. You got to do all these things. But when in our capoeira community, it's kind of just like, hey, I'm having an event. You need a passport and you need a ticket. And if you send me your ticket number, I will pick you up from the airport. And that is all the planning that you need to do for this event. So like, you talk about that, like the difference in traveling in a conventional way versus traveling with capoeira.
Yeah. And we did, I do think that, capoeira makes it seem so simplistic. And
right.
When you first hear that, you're like, so I just need a passport and that's it. Because I remember when I started, and I remember Master Skila would say, yeah, just get a passport. All you guys need is just a passport. And at the time I think I'd already gotten my passport. I got my passport the following year. But I do remember like hearing that even before training with him from other people. And I just kept thinking, just a passport? Like that's all you need is just a passport? Like that doesn't make sense. And then like once you get the passport and when someone invites you somewhere, I'll start first domestically first, before going internationally. But even when somebody just tells you, hey, I'm having an event here in Chicago, right? And they say, hey, just get a flight. And you're like, okay, I got the flight. And then as soon as you get on the flight, you're like, okay, well, I don't need to plan anything. And then you're just like, you land there, they pick you up, just like you said. And you're like, this is too easy. This is just way too easy. So then when you do international travel, you're still kind of thinking, okay, there's no way I just booked the flight. Like, that's it. And I remember the first time I went to Brazil and I booked my flight. And I booked the flight. I told Mr. Skill and his wife that I was going to be landing here at such and such. And they're like, okay, we'll take care of you the rest of the way. And in my head, I'm thinking about, okay, well, I need to make sure need to figure out when I'm going to stay. Okay, I need to make sure I have this. I need to make sure I have money for this and that. And then I get there and it's kind of like, okay, we pick you up and we'll go back to our house. And sometimes people don't even, they're not expecting anything from you in terms of paying for anything. And then you're like, well, wait, I'm staying at your house. You don't want me to pay for something? And as customer, you're going to, figure out some way to like pay them back, just because if you wouldn't feel to just be somewhere for free. But it's that idea that you literally got on a plane, someone picked you up from the airport, and now you're in their house and you're there for like however long. And it's not the same as when you travel in a group and it's organized and you have to get the hotel. You got to make sure you have the reservations. You got to make sure that you maybe have an itinerary if you're going on a trip that's not for this one thing, right? You got to make sure the activities you're doing, okay, be at the bus by 5, because if you're not at the bus by 5, they leave at 5:10. If you are not there, you're SOL, right? So you got to make sure when you're traveling in those contexts with the organized travel that everything's planned, everything's detailed. But in capoeira, it's kind of like you show up, you go to the event, you hang around with everybody, and if you're usually in a group of people and they're like, okay, we're going to so-and-so's house after the event, you're like, okay, cool. And you guys go over to their house. And next thing you know, you're there until like 3 a.m. You're like, what? And you still haven't spent nowhere near the same amount of expenses that you might have spent when you had went with your organized group, or I'll say your organized group, meaning like you had your travel plan or whatever all set out. And you just went to a Batizado maybe in another country, right? And all you did was show up there. You got off the flight, someone picked you up and they said, these are the people this is the group you're with while you're here. And you're literally just all there together. And it's not this thing of so much pre-planning. It's kind of like you just tell somebody, hey, I'm coming, the event's this time. Okay, I pay for the event, I go, and then that's it. You're just there kind of living in a sense, which is so cool, because you at the same time of breaking this travel barrier, you're also immersed into culture,
Mm-hmm.
usually unexpectedly. Like you're usually at somebody's house, you're usually eating food you've never eaten before, maybe dancing to music you never danced before, riding around, and if you're like in the car, like this is kind of scary at first when you're in like another country and seeing how they drive. But you're experiencing so much that I sometimes felt that you would not experience the same if you did like a touristy route, I'll say.
Oh.
And you went through like, you know, going through a travel agent, you have these planned activities. It's so much when you're able just to travel and you, like you said, that barrier is gone of having this organized thing where you're just there and you're just in the culture and you're just experiencing kind of what it's like to live there to a certain extent. There's still a piece of it that we don't fully experience sometimes because we're not native, but you're kind of there, especially if you're there with like a master or for a capoeira event, you're experiencing other people and other cultures, and it's just like, wow, like
Yeah.
capoeira allowed me to be here.
Yeah.
Like,
I think, and this is a parallel that I don't know how much is your experience. This is from me as a disabled person, but I'm also hearing you talk about this. I'm also thinking about just the safety factor of international travel, right? So like so for me as a disabled person, like if I'm going to travel, I need people that can help me feel safe when I'm there,
right.
because things are going to come up. And I think about how much fear there is for a lot of marginalized folks, that like if you're not safe in your own country, what guarantee do they have that they're going to be safe in somebody else's? But like within the context of capoeira, you're going to somebody who lives there and is inherently invested, or out there inherently invested in your well-being, you know. Like you're going in a group, you're going with your friends, but you're also like going with your friends that are from there, like, you know, people. And those like social barriers of like, am I going to be safe here, are easier to surmount when you're going in this context, you know, because it is a lot to ask people who have never been safe in their own country to like go somewhere else they don't know anything about and just be like, well, I'm here now and I don't speak the language and I don't know where my taxi is and I don't know how racism works here, or sexism or ableism, all of these things. But like, you have that that creates security for people that otherwise might not be confident enough to travel.
No, that's very true. That is very true. I remember my first time going, I probably would not have gone if my master didn't live down there. Like I wouldn't have been so free to go. I did go with another student here, but it made it way easier. You're right. Knowing that he was there, him and his family, that I felt safe. I didn't feel unsafe. And I'm trying to think of a time since going there. Usually the times I've gone there always have been to his events. So I haven't felt a period of being unsafe. Because like you're saying, if you know where you're going, it breaks that barrier of like, wondering what's all going on. Not to say that you should not know what's going on or be aware, because you should be aware of like checking things out, making sure you read the news before you go, like understanding, asking your friends and teachers there, like what's going on. So you also know from the aspect of you're still an outsider, how you should dress, you know, how things you say, do, look, whatever, those sorts of things, you still need to ask them for the context. Because sometimes we've all done something or said something that from a culture perspective, it's like, that's not what we do here. And you might not know that, but you got to ask them or have them tell you, you know. But you do break down a barrier of the fearfulness that you may have. It may decrease a lot because you know someone there who knows you, and like you said, hopefully has your well-being at heart, that they're not going to allow you to be in a situation with anyone, even if it's another capoeirista or whatever, where you feel scared or unsure. So that is another barrier that capoeira can break sometimes. It gives like this ticket. As I'm thinking about it, it's kind of almost like getting a golden ticket, right? And you're like, wow, this cool ticket. And I can meet people. That's why sometimes when people ask me about capoeira, I'm like, it's kind of like a hippie kind of lifestyle. You get to just like meet different people, and it's kind of cool and it's neat. But be careful. You always got to be careful anywhere with yourself. But it is kind of cool, you know? So.
Well, I think that definitely goes to when we have been having these larger conversations in the capoeira community of like, what does it mean to create safety for our students that have like intersecting identities that make them unsafe in a lot of ways? Like that just goes how much to the importance of like doing work to make your group safe, you know, because
Right.
we do have this like very default trust. Like I have stayed in so many people's houses that I did not know that they just picked me up from the bus stop and they're like, right,
Yeah.
I'm the housing coordinator for our event. So I'm just like, you and you have good personalities, so you will be staying together. Like,
Right.
but I mean, in that environment, it just becomes so much more important to create safety in our groups, you know, like because we've been entrusted with the safety of our peers, like we need to actively cultivate, you know, safety and protecting folks. But I think that it's this part of the reason for a series like these is like having the conversations about like saying these things explicitly, whereas before they were just like kind of implied, you know? Um, so yeah, I really like, I didn't plan any of that. That was just an interesting path to take from the question. But yeah, going back to some of the other stuff that we've talked about. So we've talked about the idea when we talk about international travel, people not seeing them do that. Like that's not something that they can envision. They have like a crisis of imagination when it comes to seeing themselves as people who travel, people who speak a different language, people who flip. But also, you know, that ties a lot to marginalized identities as well. When you grow up in a country where your entire media, often your teachers, are telling you that if you're a Black or brown youth, that you cannot do certain things, it's hard to avoid internalizing that racism, you know? And it's really hard to avoid developing a limited idea of who you can be based on who you're seeing yourself portrayed as in every like aspect of media, of your education. This goes back to Eurocentric education in,
Right.
you know, the subtleties of people's experiences like with discrimination and microaggressions. So in your framework, you believe that giving kids exposure to the arts, and you believe especially in giving them exposure to capoeira when they're younger, can help to combat that internalized racism, also the externalized racism. So can we start with internalized and then talk about the, you know, more blatant societal racism? Like, how do you think that giving these kids exposure actually helps to kind of give them resilience almost against internal and external racism?
Mm-hmm. Often, like you mentioned before about teachers sometimes not saying things they can't do. Sometimes it's the fact that teachers didn't bring it up at all. Like
Yeah.
sometimes if you don't, so for me, it's like if someone doesn't say something to you at all, it's not that sometimes it's not that the intent is exactly to be, hey, you can't do this, but it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, why bring it up? Because it's everything else that the person's thinking about. Well, they're not going to have the resources, they're not going to have the interest, they're not going to have this, so I'm not even going to bring it up. And that's kind of like sometimes how I think with the arts, certain pieces of it don't get brought up in certain spaces because it's like,
Yeah.
well, they're not going to be able to pay for this. They're not going to be able to do this. Their parents are going to work late hours. They're not going to want to do such and such. And oftentimes it's like the opposite. Like sometimes people just need the opportunity to be given to them, and then they'll invest in you or invest in what their child likes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've seen that. So when I'm saying like with the internalizing of things as far as not having the opportunities for a child, sometimes if they don't see or if they're not told, yeah, there's an opportunity for it, they're not going to necessarily go seek it sometimes either. Because I've also taught in spaces where a child may say, oh, I never thought about that. Or a parent may say
Mm-hmm.
that, I never thought about that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that the parent said to me, that's stupid. They just said, I never thought about it. You
Which
know,
is
which
such a
means
different statement, right? Like,
it is. It's not the same statement as someone
oh,
saying, I don't like that. That's another thing. If you don't like it, you don't like it. But if you're saying, I never thought about that, it's kind of like, okay, or I never saw that before. Oh, I saw that. I didn't know about that. Because I've also get that response too of I didn't know about it. And so with the internalizing of things, for some kids, if they don't have the exposure to it, they're not going to know what that is. They're not going to be able to have an idea of that access. So then they're just going to think, well, okay, I'm supposed to just be like this, or this is what's expected of me. This is what I'm told I'm allowed to do. Very out in the open, I'm told this, and sometimes I'm told this subliminally.
mm-hmm.
So they're just going to say, I'm just going to do that because you didn't expect nothing more of me. That's what I'm going to do. And that sometimes will create certain things, that certain feelings within inside people that a lot of times, even the conversation that we're having today with race and things like that, people don't realize, like when we talk about systems oppressing people, they don't realize what it can do because a thought was never placed in your head. And the word access is just kind of saying we have to just give somebody the access to have the opportunity to decide, is this thing stupid? Such as, like, if somebody were to say, is capoeira stupid? Or is it that I've just never seen it before, but I do want to try it? Like, those are two different, things. And so when I'm looking at things, my work is trying to get kids to understand they're beyond a stereotype. So you may see something, but I want your mindset is to think that I'm beyond this stereotype of what I've been told or not told I can't do. Like, if somebody all the time always showed you, well, the boys play football over here, the girls run track, or the girls do cheerleading, that's all we got. But there's other things that maybe they want to do, but they don't know about these other pieces.
And we put a lot of responsibility on kids too, as well, because we, for some reason, expect that a kid that's like 12 that has been not exposed to other types of athleticism, other types of interests, other types of arts, are just going to be like, yes, I have a strong interest in violin. I've never seen one. I've never really heard one except, on like a TV show. But yes, that's what I want to do. Like, as adults, we can look into it, but like kids, it's just like they know what we show them. That's it. That's all they got. Sorry, but yeah.
No, but that is true. And sometimes people forget that there's this assumption that kids are just going to jump out of nowhere and say, hey, I want to do this thing over here. And sometimes they don't. Like, I've taken capoeira to different spaces, and people weren't sure that the kids there would like it. And then they ended up liking it. And they were really surprised that they ended up liking it. They were like, oh, no, they're not going to like it. And it's like, yeah, they did, because we showed them something different. We presented to them in a different way.
Yeah.
We didn't just come at this and say, this is, there's one way, but we showed them, hey, this is something different. This is an option. It's not the other options that you've been given. And then they like, most of the time I've had positive experiences with capoeira where most kids do like it. So it's more so about giving, that's what I'm saying, the access to then choose, versus then if you don't ever provide anybody with the access, and it doesn't even have to be capoeira, it's just the access to the art. Like you said, a violin, we don't know who's going to pick up a violin. I mean, it could be the least likely person. Sometimes I've had the kid that's the baddest kid that the teacher told me, and they like capoeira the most. Like, they were the ones who the teacher said, well, they're the most not engaged, but they're the most engaged when they come in my space.
Yeah.
So it's all about, like, providing the access. And then, like you're saying, it's so much that you do place on a child to say, make a decision. They don't know what they want. Sometimes we don't know what we want as adults. So it's like the access is like, asinine. So.
Oh, that's real. And so that's how capoeira, in your view, can help combat internalized racism. What do you think about creating resilience against external racism? Like, if somebody is blatantly racist or microaggressive to one of your students, like, how do you see capoeira fitting into the ways that they might defend themselves or protect themselves from that in the real world? I'm not talking necessarily physically, because we can fight everybody, but like more so what do you hope that capoeira gives your students to kind of fight back against systems that like seek their eradication?
My hope is that capoeira gives them confidence. It gives them confidence to say something back, to have a voice, so that they don't feel they have to accept the voice that someone else is trying to give them, that they have something to say. Even if it's opposite, it doesn't matter. You have something to say. It's kind of like when I'm in teaching and a kid has a question, I try to make sure, we all heard that same adage of there's no dumb question. And you really try to make sure people understand that. It's the same thing. There's no dumb comment sometimes either, because some comments, can be rude, but let's frame about how you said it, So with kids, it's like making sure that capoeira gives them confidence to feel like, I can say this, my voice does matter. And not being afraid to say, well, let me just, well, she said that's what I did, that's what I'm gonna do. But like, if that's not how you're feeling, you gotta voice your opinion. Like, you gotta let them know. And so it's like giving them confidence to say something. Your voice has a purpose, your voice matters. Don't be afraid to use your voice. Don't let someone else put words in your mouth if they're not true, even if they are true. Still make sure your voice is heard if that's not how they're speaking your truth. So I hope that capoeira gives kids a sense of pride and self-confidence and courage to be who they are, say how they feel, say their truth, and not be afraid of what someone else has to feel about their truth.
I think that that's so interesting because when we look at a lot of things, like people have this very kind of dichotomous, like meaning just a only two sides view of a lot of things, right? Like if you're racist, you just stop being racist. If you have low self-esteem, you just stop having low self-esteem. If you if you have anxiety, you just stop having anxiety. That's a whole other thing. But I think about how pride in oneself is a practice. You know, so many things. Confidence is a practice. Like when you are trying to teach a child to be confident, they have to have instances in which they build, in which they have those little forays into like, okay, well, I wasn't sure about whether I was doing the kick right, but I raised my hand and Miss Reba helped me figure out how to do it. So maybe the next time, like, this is my child's voice, by the way, maybe the next time I can, I can do that again. And like, I think about the importance of building in kids and creating safe environments for them to practice pride in themselves, to practice pushing back. I feel like in a lot of capoeira classes, that's one of the few educational spaces that they can just be like, no, this is not working for me. And it's like, okay, well, now we have to figure out together how it works for you, So I think that that's like a very interesting way that your capoeira classes, for sure, and many other people's, if they wanted to implement that mindset, can function to really just build the skills that kids need for like a really scary world.
The world is scary, and you're right that it is a journey. And then making sure that, like I was saying earlier, when if a kid doesn't do something that day, it's not to also let them feel that they didn't get something done.
Yeah.
And that they didn't have the courage. Like, that's why sometimes I'll say, well, you're already standing up here. So you already took the courage to stand up and try something. You're already here in front of me. You're already singing in a song today. So that's why sometimes you also have to make sure when you're in these spaces that you're not just focused on one piece. Like, maybe we're talking about history, maybe we're talking about songs, maybe we're talking about, and you remind them that you have the confidence to raise your hand and give the answer when no one else did. That maybe you didn't answer this piece, but you answered another piece. So it's always about also reinforcing that you did something today, And if you didn't, if you had a day where you acted out and you were bad, okay, we acknowledge it and we say we're gonna do something then next time that's different.
Yeah.
You kind of like acknowledge the bad too and say this wasn't a good day. Next time, can we make it a better time? Like, you have to acknowledge it, just like as an adult, when you have bad days, physically, emotionally, mentally, whatever, you learn, or they think sometimes the things that they'll say to tell you to do it, so you have to acknowledge it and say this wasn't a good day. And if you don't, you're just like sweeping it under the rug. Same with kids, same with teaching Black and brown kids. If I want to be someone who's trying to teach them confidence, I can't just push it under the rug the one day they didn't do well and not acknowledge it. Like, I have to acknowledge it. Like, I can't not, so it's both of like, it's a journey, and making sure they understand that this is not 1, 2, like you said, like, hey, you get over your anxiety. I can't, like, you can't just like be done with it. It's a process, and everything, as we get older, we realize it's a process, but it's also trying to get kids to understand, hey, you keep practicing, you get better. You don't practice, you don't get better. We know that all in capoeira. Like, if you don't practice something, you're not gonna get better at it. It's like speaking Portuguese. If you don't practice speaking Portuguese, you're gonna forever be saying bom dia all the time. Like, you gotta keep practicing, these pieces. And I can say some of those things because I know for myself, like, those are some of my own struggles. So I'm not saying anything that's like meant to shade anybody, but those are my own struggles where I'm building on as well. So there's so much there that people can internalize and externalize, that the goal, like I say when I teach, is to make sure kids have self-confidence, courage, and that they can see more and give them a sense of hope that, like, hey, there's something bigger than you. How can you get to that,
Yeah, absolutely. So that's about it, our time for today. I wanted to thank you again. If people wanted to reach out, learn more about you, learn more about your school, where would they go for that information? If they wanted to invite you to events, where would they go for that? Where would they go for that information?
You can find me on Facebook. My Facebook is Reba Bowens. You can also follow me on Instagram. My name is REBBS_3. And then the community service work that I do is called the Queen City Jenga Project. Everything that I'm doing is connected to the International Capital School that's under Mr. Esquilo. I'm connected to him. He's my master here, and then I also train here with the group here, the International Capoeira School here in Charlotte with Contra Mestres in B. So I'm training as much as I can. The COVID-19 kind of has like paused some training opportunities, but that's where you can find me if you want to get more information. Follow my best places, Facebook and Instagram.
Do you have any events planned for your school in the event that the world actually does open back up ever and we can do things again?
I didn't mean to laugh at that, but right now, to my knowledge, no. I'm very bummed. I was supposed to go to Brazil this next month, and I'm still kind of curious to take a flight because they're super cheap right now. But then it's like, gosh.
No, don't do it! Don't do it! Please!
Do it. I know. It's one of those like, gosh, they look so good. But right now, no, there's no events that I'm aware of that we're planning. Everything's on Zoom right now. So
it's like as soon as and if people wanted to like attend your class virtually, could they hit you up to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
I teach mostly kids virtually. I don't teach adults. I just teach mostly kids.
Good point. Well, it's so funny because like as soon as the uprising started, we just kind of forgot COVID existed, and it's like no, things are still on hold. Anyway,
that is true.
If you would like to participate or contribute to this series, Reba's interview along with the 5 others that we've completed so far are going to be up on the YouTube channel that Agua Viva was kind enough to create. There's also a GoFundMe. I have been personally financing this out of my pocket, so we are quite a bit into it, and I would like to keep this going. So that is, if you like what you are seeing here, if you want to toss us $10 to get more folks on, if you have people that you would like to see on this, if you have topics that you'd like to hear discussed or voices you'd like to hear, work you'd like to hear amplified, please reach out to me. I am so down for collaboration. And thank you again, Reba. Hopefully I'll see you in the product soon.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I want to say thank you so much. I'm very humbled for you to even ask me to do this. So I totally am feeling like a little starstruck, but thank you.
No, you totally deserve this. I'm so glad you agreed. All right. I'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.